Hi everyone, Tjena läget grabben. Welcome to the Swedish line. This is the Tier 9 Emil II. It's a follow on from the Emil, so we'll have a look at the tech spec, we'll have a look at the all the details because there are some changes, some minor changes and some major changes from the Emil I to Tier 8. In particular, this gun system moves from being an auto-loader to an auto-reloader. So it has some significant differences. We'll use blitzhanger.com as always, but you know, this is a great line. I've enjoyed playing it all the way up, and this is a great tank in that line. Definitely one worth getting, and definitely one you'll enjoy playing, I think. So we'll have a look at all that. Before that, we'll be again joined by our Swedish expert to discuss some of the history of this tank. So this is kind of a real tank. I mean, it never really existed, but there were plans, and it was developed from the Emil II, or the Emil I. A few people asked me why it was called the Emil, if it was something to do with the Stuart Emil. It's not. It's because one of the designers, main designer, was Emil Olsen. It was developed under the code name Kranvagen, which basically means mobile crane, because they wanted to keep it secret, particularly from the KGB, who were poking around Sweden a lot, because Sweden feared an invasion by the USSR should they attack the West. And these tanks, their idea was to unite and to create a single tank corps that could, and they wanted to develop tanks that could fight the Russian IS Rangers, obviously a very powerful range of tanks. So they used a chassis design from the Emil I. And they put on this 120mm gun, but of course that made it a lot heavier due to the gun system. So and you'll see that reduction in mobility when we look at the tank in the tech spec. Development began in 1952, so a year after the original Emil project, but it was stopped after a few years. So we say it's kind of a real tank in that the plans were done, there was test units built, but never actually went into production. So kind of a real tank. But anyway, let's not blow our top over that, like the Swedish chef here, and let's have a look at the tech spec. So in terms of provisions, I would run improved fuel, crackers and salmon, max out performance. I know it's slightly different here in Blitzhanger, I don't know why, but that's what's in game. There's a 105mm gun and then the top 120mm gun. You get the top gun last, get the turret first if I were you. In terms of pen, 265mm of pen with AP, 330mm with APCR for the top gun, 66mm with HE. If you run calibrated shells, which I would do because it always makes sense, an autoloader. Reload is 3.5 seconds in between rounds, and rounds take a long time to load though. So it's 29.6 seconds to load up the full magazine, and it's 11.1 for the first shell, then 9.26 for the second and third shell. So it takes a long time, and you'll notice in the game when you're moving into position that you'll get into positions on the map and you won't have the full magazine fully loaded. Gun index is 13.5, so it's an increase from the Emil I. But the mobility index is 2.1, so it's a decrease from the Emil I. So you're going to have better gun handling, but you're going to be less mobile, and that is a reflection of the actual design of the tank, as we discussed earlier, right? Now you get 1200 burst damage, right, and that goes up to 1600 with HE, and you can unleash that in 7 seconds. So it is really crazy firepower if you've got a full magazine loaded. I would run supercharged, refined gun, and calibrated shells on this. I think that's the best loadout in terms of equipment. Now I need to talk to you about shell management. Why? Well, because there's huge muzzle velocity differences. AP is 1300 meters per second. HE is 1092 meters per second, but heat is 1092 meters per second, but HE is only 884. What does that mean? Well, it's a 16% reduction from AP to heat, and a 32% reduction from AP to HE. Over 300 meters, the AP round takes 2.3 seconds to get there, but the HE round takes 0.4 of a second, almost twice as much, and that difference can be the difference between a hit and a miss. So shell management is very important, guys. Be aware of that. Power to weight ratio is decent. It only does 30 kilometers per hour, so it's slower than the Emil I, again reflecting that design as we spoke about. Traverse is also poor, so you know it's not as good brawler as the Emil I. Concealment is awful, right? At 304 meter view range, you're going to be spotted up within 270 meters. If you're moving 284 meters when you're moving, it's terrible. If there's an RU251 or something, Vickers with really good view range in the other team, you're going to get spotted up early and fast. So therefore I would also run that improved engine accelerator as well. In terms of armor, if we look at the armor here, you can side scrape in this tank. It will get bounces. It has really good relative armor numbers on the side. The turret is really strong, exactly like the Emil before it. So you also have the gun depression, although you do get a decrease in gun depression, we'll discuss that later on. But you can side scrape in this tank, and of course hull down, it is a monster. It's slightly bigger than the Emil, so you're not such a small target as you were before, but it's still not a huge tank, and there's not a lot of it to hit even side on, right, especially from distance. You can aim for that type of elongated turret if you want to, but that's a small target, and if the turret's moving, you can miss that easily. So you know, it is a decent tank in terms of its armor, in terms of both the armor itself and the armor and the profile of the tank. Front on, you can see here, if you're top tier, you can be an absolute bully against your own tier, really competitive. But even when you're up tiered, still difficult to pen, especially on the turret and that part of the armor just underneath the turret on the hull. Now, in terms of tactics, we discussed before, and with the Emil itself, you can go hull down, but bear in mind you're losing 1 degree of gun depression. Now that may not seem like much, but you know, when you're up against the very best players, having to pop your hull that little bit further over makes a little bit of a difference, especially when you're up against the best players in tier 9 and tier 10. So just be aware of that. You're going to lose that 1 degree to gun depression, so if you're going hull down, you need to just be aware of that. Maybe take this into a training room beforehand, practice that gun depression so you don't come a cropper, because you know there's going to be Death Stars, grills, big guns on the other team, right, when you're playing tier 9. You know, in terms of brawling, it's not as good as the Emil I. It loses that mobility. But the good thing about it is, right, because you have an auto reloader, it means that you can fire shells on spec. You can fire shells without knowing that you are going to lose a shell from magazine. You can fire a shell off on spec. If it doesn't go through 9.2 seconds later, you're going to have it reloaded, right, and back to a full magazine. So this is a much better advantage than just having the full magazine where you fire 3 shells and you're out. Here you fire your 3 shells, you're going to be back to 1 shell in 11 seconds, and back to 2 shells in just under 20 seconds. So let's have a look at some gameplay, and we're going to be on Faust. So you will see the auto reloader here in action. Those of you who played the European line before with the Pantera, the Standard B, or the Progetto 65, or the Progetto 46 or 48, whatever it is in tier 8, you will now be familiar with this auto reloading gun system. But basically it's a magazine reload system. So at the initial, it starts off exactly the same, right? You have to load up 3 shells, but when you fire off a shell, you don't stay at 2 shells. It reloads back to the 3rd shell, and so on. If you fire 2 shells, it reloads back to the 2nd shell, the 3rd shell, so it automatically reloads. So a significant advantage. So you're never going to be caught having no shells in the magazine, as you are with a full auto loader. You can see here the bounce I got. So again, that's that armor in play. Really nice bounce there. And again, that's that relative armor numbers from the side scraping. But you can see what I mean here, right? We are now into the game 30 seconds, and I've only fully loaded the magazine, right? So you just be aware of that, you know, because normally when you're playing a heavy tank, you go to seize a strategic position on the map, like here with D, or somewhere else on any map, right? That's what heavy tanks do. And you have your gun loaded, right? But in this, sure, you'll have 1 shell loaded, but maybe 2, but you won't have the magazine fully loaded. That's very unusual, right? So the shell, the full magazine shell reload is really long at 30 seconds, right? So just be aware of that. You need to manage that within the game. You can see though what I mean about the difference between the auto loader and the auto reloader. I fired off my 3 shells into the T44, but I already have 1 shell loaded back. Now I've got 2. So shell management in terms of shells in the magazine is much easier than it is with an just as plain old auto loader. You can see here the burst damage is great, right? Every 3.5 seconds I'm just pumping around, and again, good gun management and shell management. I am focusing my fire on the M103. He's the most dangerous tank there, right? He's the tier 9. So I am just focusing fire on him, track him there, leave him in place. I roll back. Again, the lessons that we learned when we looked at the autoloader tutorial with the Emil I. When you are not engaging, so when you don't have a round loaded up, just back off, because you can't do anything, right? There's no point in you sitting there presenting yourself as a target. You can't do anything. You can't engage the enemy. So unless you're in a position where you can ram, there's nothing you can do. So while you're not able to fire around, just back off, keep yourself safe, and conserve your hit points, because you never know, later on in the game you might need that. This is one of the aspects, by the way, of the game which has changed since they did this blowing the turret off, right? Turrets go all over the place now, and they can really affect gameplay, so both positively and negatively, right? So you see there, it can delay your ability to move around the map. Sometimes you often don't see them because they're quite low down. But it can also help you if you're being if something is trying to circle a death. You've probably seen many times a really fast moving tank will run into a turret and just stop or slow down and you get a shot at it. So it has pluses and minuses, but it definitely has affected the gameplay for sure, right? It adds a new aspect of a new dynamic into the game. It can be positive or negative. I personally like it because I think it means that you need to think a bit more, and you need to be aware of your surroundings a bit more, and that's something that we preach on this channel kind of religiously, if I can use that word. So, you know, I think it does teach you and makes you be a bit more disciplined and aware of your game surroundings. So you can see here, this is what is it? It's almost a 5.2k damage game. Normally that'd be a mastery game, but as we discussed before, at the moment, and look at over 1400 base XP, which oftentimes playing tier 9 is enough for mastery. But obviously at the moment, because there's so many players playing these tanks and so many really, really good players, right? Because you got all the best players coming down from tier 9 and 10 to grind this line. So you've got better players, better caliber players playing this tank more often. So as I said before, when we discussed all the way through this line, don't be worried, and you know, there's nothing to be ashamed about if you don't not getting mastery badges and things like that, because the tanks, the whole base XP line is skewed right now, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. Just enjoy playing the tank, because it's a game and it's all about enjoyment, right? So just enjoy playing the tank. They're a great tank line. Don't worry about badges and stuff like that, right? So having said that, this is going to be a mastery game. I thought I'd share it with you just so you have to see, just so you can see just exactly how much base XP you need these days to get a mastery badge in one of these things. We'll have a look at the end, but I think if memory serves me, I think the base XP is 1,750 or something required for a mastery badge, which is just crazy stuff, right? So, but let's have a look at it again, because this is a good example of this tank in action again. So we're on Oasis Palms. It's a supremacy game, and in this game we're actually up tiered. But you'll see when you're up tiered, this tank still can hold its own. Also, it has very, very similar play style to the Kranwagen, which comes at tier 10. So basically, it's easily transferable skill set from this tier 9 up into the Kranwagen. Plus, it has the same gun system, auto reloading gun system, so that you don't need to worry about changing gun system again as you do from tier 8 to tier 9. You can see there a bounce. From the turret, you're going to get bounces from the turret all the time. I can put another round in here, and I don't get a chance to finish this guy off. And actually, in my search for that last shot, I actually take a round by going too far up onto the hill. But anyway, going to take a step back here, try to reset camo, and I am going to then push on once I have the full magazine reloaded. Again, same observation as from the previous game, right? Takes a long time to reload a magazine fully, right? Almost 30 seconds, right? But when you are reloaded, you can do this. You can clear off a tank completely, especially if it's not at its full hit points, right? And allows you to just clear off a tank completely. And you know that 11 seconds later you're going to have a round back reloaded into the muzzle and ready for action, and then you can take shots like this. Whereas if you're in the Emil I, you wouldn't be able to take that shot because you would still be 10 seconds away from having your magazine reloaded. So that is one of course the key advantages of an auto reloader. But don't get complacent, right? If you're fighting against something, let's say like an AMX or either the tier 9 or the tier 10 50B, you may think, okay, or let's say a T57 heavy or something like that. You may think, okay, right, well, I'm actually going to have, we're going to fire 3 rounds each, but then I have a round coming, right? Yeah, you do, and that's good. But bear in mind, you're going to have 2 rounds in ready in 20 seconds. He's going to have reloaded his full magazine, so he's going to fire 3 into for your 2. So you need to be aware of that, right? So there are definitely advantages of the auto reloader, right? But there are also disadvantages, right? Again, you can see here, now I can clear off him. Unfortunately, I take a round from him, but I wanted to clear him off. He also seemed like a good player. He was doing a lot of damage there, so I just wanted to get rid of him. So just be aware of that, right? Now, so then you're probably saying, okay, well, Armoured, well then, is it really an advantage? Well, it is, because if you're in a brawl with that T57 Heavy, or the AMX50B or whatever like that, and you're down to 1 shot each, right? Then you're going to clear him off because he's 10 seconds away from being able to fire a round into you. If you're down to 2 rounds each, you still have an advantage because you're going to fire your 2 rounds before him. If you're down to 3 rounds to take each other out, then yes, you're at a disadvantage, and you need to consider that. So therefore, again, it's just about being aware of. So you need to calculate, you know, your average damage per round is 400, right? So you need to check, okay, how many rounds do I need to take out the guy I'm brawling with if it's another autoloader, right? And if it's below 2 rounds, then you're good to go. If it's more than 2 rounds, then you need to consider about maybe hiding or getting into some cover, and reloading your shells completely before going back out. So it's just, I just need to make you aware of that, because the automatic assumption is, okay, I've got an auto reloader now, so I'm good to go, right? And normally, yes, most occasions it is an advantage, but don't get complacent. You need to calculate exactly the time it's going to take you to clear off an opponent if you're in a 1v1 brawl with another auto loader, because as I said, below 2 you're good, above 2 you need to be very careful and consider. So just be aware of that, guys. Just some advice and just something I've noticed from playing with this tank, because it really is a long reload, that almost 30 seconds for the full magazine. You saw I got really lucky there with the round from the IS-4. I took a low RNG, low roll, left me with 34 hit points, and allowed me to put another round into him and clear him off, and that delivered a mastery badge. You can see there almost 5k damage. So less damage than the previous game, but look at the base XP here, over 1700, and that's what's required to deliver a mastery badge at the moment in this tank line. So just be aware of that. And so as I said, no shame in not getting mastery badges or first class or whatever like that. Just enjoy playing it. And mastery badges will come later on after everything settles down, and you know, it starts being played at a normal amount and by your kind of standard profile of players. So no need to sweat it at the moment. But I think overall it's a good game to illustrate the strengths of this tank. So it's burst damage, its gun index, its gun handling, but you also saw there the sort of lack of mobility that it has as well. It's not the fastest around the map, but then you don't expect that from a heavy tank. So let's have a recap. I think overall it's a very good heavy tank. I definitely enjoyed playing it, especially when played to its strengths and being cognitive of its limitations, as we discussed during the video. It has okay power to weight ratio, but has poor traverse, so just be aware of that, guys. It is a significant decrease in traverse versus the Emil I, and therefore it's not as good brawler, so just be cognitive of that, be aware of that, right? You're going to have a decrease in your brawling prowess. It has great frontal armor, as you saw. You can get steel wall medals, you can get Spartan medals in this tank, especially if you play to its strengths and just expose that turret, because it's a really good turret. And you've got the gun depression, so therefore, like the tanks before, it's a hull down monster. But just be aware, guys, you're losing that 1 degree of gun depression, right? It has terrible concealment numbers, really awful. So you need to be careful when you're moving into position. You can get spotted up early and often. So therefore, I would also run that improved engine boost so you can get into your positions quicker before you can get spotted. Burst damage is great, as we saw illustrated particularly in the second game, but there's a long reload for full magazine, almost 30 seconds, so just be aware of that, especially when fighting other auto loaders, as we discussed in the second game. So cheers Mush, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you found this useful, and I guess now all that remains for me to say is pants off.